Hey guys, tonight we sink into a time when the air smells wrong, the streets glisten with mystery liquids, and your neighbors are dying faster than the bells can ring. You stand at the edge of a Victorian alleyway, squinting through smog and sewage mist, your boots sinking into something that's definitely not mud. The year is somewhere in the early 19th century, and cholera is not just a disease, it's a rumor, a fear, a sentence that floats on every breath. You'll clutch your stomach, whisper a prayer, and still not make it to Thursday. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, I'd love to know, where are you listening from and what time is it for you right now? Post it in the comments. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. There, first thing you notice is the smell. It's not one odor, it's a stack. Rotting cabbage, chimney soot, human waste, dead rats, and something sweet that's way too close to the scent of decay. You hold a damp cloth to your nose like everyone else and pray it works better than it actually does. Because when you live in the time of cholera, nothing about your body feels safe, not even the air. You walk cautiously, dodging puddles that steam faintly even though it's not cold. The gutters gurgle. Children with bare feet splash past you laughing like they don't know they're kicking through infectious soup. A woman pours a bucket of something brown from her window. It splashes onto the cobbles near your boot. You try not to ask what it was. You try really hard, and it's not just the poor quarters, by the way. Even the finer streets reek by sunset. Horse droppings steam in the mews. Chamber pots are emptied from upstairs windows with a shout, if you're lucky. If you're not, lucky you find yourself baptized by your neighbor's breakfast. The rich may have more walls and flowers, but cholera doesn't care for social divides. It seeps under doors, hitchhikes on boots, and rides the breeze like a hungry ghost. Historians still argue whether people genuinely believed they could smell death coming, or if they just got used to associating certain stenches with catastrophe. Either way, the fear is palpable, and the stink, unforgettable. You pause at a pump, a public water source, the kind of thing you'd trust with your life if you didn't know better. A woman fills a bucket beside you, smiling faintly, her lips tinged blue, not with lipstick, but with the early warning signs. She coughs once, twice. The handle creaks. You both say nothing. See, back then, most folks had no idea how cholera worked. The science was shaky, the theories wild, and the solutions worse than the problem. Some said it floated in bad air, miasma they called it. Others blamed immorality, foreign influence, or even an excess of ripe fruit. If your cousin ate too many plums and died the next day, well, you do the math. But the real culprit? Water. Specifically, water contaminated with waste. You know this. You live in the future. But right now, in this story, you're just like everyone else, haunted by a sickness you can't see, touch, or explain. You pass a pile of lime, freshly dumped into a gutter. Someone thinks it'll disinfect the street. Another man walks behind, sprinkling ash from a broken pot just in case. It's all guesswork. Some families hang herbs in their windows. Others burn incense until the walls turn black. The air smells like a mixture of desperation and denial. Let's talk symptoms, shall we? Just in case you're thinking, could I have survived this? Spoiler, probably not. Cholera moves fast. You could go from feeling perfectly fine to death's door within hours. It begins with stomach cramps, then comes vomiting, then waterfall-level diarrhea. So extreme, your body practically folds in on itself. Dehydration shrivels your skin, your eyes sink, your voice grows thin. Eventually, you look like a statue someone left out in the rain. And if you're wondering whether the sick are quarantined, the answer is sometimes. If the authorities have enough manpower, the worst homes get marked, chalk crosses on the door, police at the corners, sick carts dragging the dying to overflow hospitals. But often, people just lock the infected in a back room and hope for a miracle, or at least a painless end. Now for a fringe fact. Some Victorians believed cholera was a punishment for bad behavior, specifically public urination. Yes, one prominent Pamphlet blamed the spread of disease on bladder indiscretion, so naturally the city cracked down on the urination, not the sewage-filled water system. Because logic. You walk past a newspaper boy shouting the latest death toll. He's 12. His voice is hoarse. He's probably an orphan. The front page shows a woodcut of a weeping Britannia, her gown draped over the grave of another city. You glance at it, then back at the pump, and think, maybe just stay thirsty today. At the next corner, there's a preacher screaming about sin. He blames opera, women in trousers, and the French, obviously. His voice booms across the crowd, but no one listens. People are too busy surviving. And you? You're still walking, still breathing, still clean, for now. But you eye every drop of water with suspicion. You dodge every cough like it's a dagger. You wish you'd been born in any other time. You wish you could drink from a tap without wondering if it's planning your murder. And as you step over another gutter of swirling gray filth, you realize something very modern. You miss hand sanitizer. You're thirsty now, actually thirsty. The kind that scrapes the back of your throat and makes your thoughts slosh like dirty water in a cracked pail. But you're in the middle of a cholera-stricken city, and your choices are slim. There's a water pump at the end of the street, cool iron catching the light, surrounded by people who haven't started dying yet. It looks safe. It feels safe. You hesitate, because here's the thing. In 1854, there was a pump on Broad Street in London that looked exactly like this one. Neat, accessible, reliable. It served hundreds of people daily. Families, shopkeepers, infants, bakers, the occasional snooty goose. And it was also the epicenter of one of the deadliest cholera outbreaks in Victorian history. You inch closer to the pump, now aware that every splash from its spout could be harboring something invisible and vicious. People don't know that, yet, though. They're still clinging to the idea that if the water looks clear and doesn't smell like a fermented boot, it's fine. Spoiler, it's not. Historians still argue whether Broad Street's pump was shut down quickly enough or if the authorities dragged their feet. What we do know is that a man named Dr. John Snow, yes, like the Game of Thrones guy, but with fewer swords and more sewage, was about to flip the script on public health. But we'll come back to him. Right now, your throat still burns, and that pump handle is practically winking at you. You reach out, hesitating only slightly. The iron is cold and slick with morning dew. Someone left a cloth draped nearby, presumably to filter the water, but really it's just spreading bacteria faster than gossip at a garden party. You pump once, twice. The water flows into your tin. Cup clear as glass, looking for all the world like salvation. You hesitate, sniff it, smells fine, tastes, well, a little earthy, but you've had worse, and then you drink. You, like so many in this time, have no idea that water can betray you. You still think of illness as a punishment from God or, at worst, the result of too much night air. The idea that your water source could be casually murdering you is too horrifying to believe, and thus conveniently ignored. Back in the day, even the city's finest doctors didn't connect the dots. They believed cholera came from bad smells, miasmas, so they tried to sweeten the air. They burned tar, sprayed perfume, filled rooms with vinegar steam. It was a bit like spraying Febreze on a house fire. Meanwhile, the real issue? The cesspools, latrines, and open gutters dumping human waste directly into the water table. The Broad Street pump was located mere feet from a leaking cesspit, and no one thought to ask if the two might be connected. A true don't drink and diarrhea situation. The tragic irony. Some of the people who boiled their water made it worse. They'd collect water from the pump, boil it for tea, and then stir in a bit of raw milk, which was also unpasteurized and often, let's say, generously supplied by diseased cows. So in their quest for cleanliness, they made an infectious milkshake. Bon appetit. Here's a quirky tidbit. During the Broad Street outbreak, one local brewery miraculously avoided any cholera cases among its workers. The reason? They drank beer all day, low alcohol, but still enough to kill bacteria. The water they used for brewing was boiled. Turns out, if you want to survive a cholera epidemic in Victorian London, the safest thing you can do is live at a brewery and be tipsy 24/7. You finish your cup and lower it, half expecting to feel something immediately. But cholera doesn't work like that. It waits, stalks. It's a gentleman killer. It lets you think you're fine before yanking the floor out from under you. People around you chatter idly, laughing at a passing dog or arguing over the price of eggs. But behind those smiles is fear. They've seen neighbors collapse in the street. They've watched children go pale and silent. They know cholera doesn't knock. It kicks the door in, and still, they come to the pump. Because what else is there? Boiled water tastes bad. Rainwater collects soot. Bottled water is a luxury no one trusts yet. The pump feels safe. And in a time like this, people cling to routine like a rope in a flood. That's where Jon Snow steps in, not with a cape, but with a notebook. He begins mapping the outbreak, interviewing families, plotting the victims' homes, tracing lines from death to well to latrine. Each dot on the map is a lost life, but also a clue. He suspects the pump. Everyone else suspects clouds. Snow's evidence mounts. He removes the handle from the Broad Street pump, literally disables it, and cholera cases drop. But the city? Still not convinced. It takes years for the waterborne theory to gain traction. Even then, officials drag their feet. Some think admitting the problem would panic the masses. Others just really believe in the power of lavender. You, meanwhile, go about your day. Maybe your stomach gurgles a little, maybe not. You won't know for sure until it's too late. You pass the pump again on your way home. A girl is leaning on it now, filling a chipped jug. Her hands tremble slightly. She doesn't speak. She doesn't need to. Her eyes say everything. This water is killing us, and yet, it's all we have. You wake in the night with a pit in your stomach, literal and metaphorical, the kind of tight, twisting pain that tells you something is deeply wrong. And here's the catch. It could be anything. Maybe it's the undercooked eel pie. Maybe it's the stress. Or maybe, just maybe, it's cholera tapping gently on your insides like, mind if I come in? You try not to panic. After all, you've seen people recover from stomach aches. But you've also seen them carted away with sheets over their heads before sunrise. So, like any respectable Victorian elite, you call for a doctor. Which is, frankly, the last thing you should do. The physician arrives with practiced urgency, his black bag rattling with a mix of hope and horror. He's well-dressed, well-paid, and, let's be honest, not particularly helpful. Because in the time of cholera, medicine is equal parts science and 18th century fan fiction. He presses his hand to your forehead, taps your stomach, listens gravely, then nods in that way that says, I have no idea, but I'm not about to admit it. You ask what he thinks it is. He says words like humoral imbalance and spasmodic disruption. Basically, he suspects your bodily fluids are misbehaving. The cure? Oh, buckle up. First, he bleeds you, just a little. You wince as a small blade opens your arm and dark blood trickles into a porcelain bowl. It's meant to relieve pressure. You wonder what pressure feels like without blood in your body. Then, blistering. Yes, actual blisters, raised on your back using mustard plasters or hot cups. The idea is that these blisters will somehow draw out the sickness. It feels about as pleasant as sunburn mixed with betrayal. You lie there, smelling vaguely of soup and regret. Historians still argue whether Victorian doctors genuinely believed in this torture or simply ran out of other ideas. Some wrote entire treatises on the placement of leeches. Others admitted, off record, that they were just mimicking what their mentors did. A few lucky patients got opium or laudanum to ease the symptoms. Most got warm towels and a strong pat on the hand. You try to ask for water, but the doctor frowns. He says fluid is dangerous. You might drown the stomach. Instead, he offers you calomel, a mercury compound that causes, among other things, aggressive diarrhea. It's like fighting a fire with gasoline, but in reverse. Meanwhile, he suggests fresh air, elevated feet, and, because why not, a change of moral habits. That's right. In many cases, doctors subtly, or not so subtly, blamed patients for their illness. You didn't pray enough. You read too many novels. You danced too enthusiastically at last week's soiree. Some treatments were, Creative. There's an aristocrat down the road who swears by electric baths, basically lying in a metal tub while someone zaps you with a hand-cranked current. Another swears by hot brandy enemas. Yes, that's a real thing. No, we will not elaborate. You, meanwhile, begin to realize that your best hope might be your own immune system, or the passage of time, because this man in a waistcoat is essentially improvising. He'll check back in 12 hours, or after. You've either recovered or become someone else's inheritance opportunity. Let's pause for a fringe tidbit. One of the more infamous cures during this time involved swallowing roasted coffee beans and gunpowder. Why? Because coffee was stimulating and gunpowder had energy? The logic is fuzzy. The results were worse. One pamphlet insisted this concoction rebooted the inner furnace. More often, it just rebooted the vomiting. Back in your room, the doctor packs up his tools. He scribbles something onto a card, probably your symptoms or perhaps a quick doodle of a skull. He reminds your housekeeper to hang black crepe on the door if your condition worsens, then politely vanishes into the night, possibly on horseback, possibly just to cry somewhere private. You lie in bed, weak, your insides staging a one-act play, called Exit Everything, Stage Left. The candle flickers. The room spins slightly. You think of the pump, of the girl with the jug, of all the others who thought it was just a stomachache. You hear someone crying quietly downstairs. Maybe your sister, maybe the maid. No one says your name, and still, your body fights. Somewhere between nausea and numbness, you wonder how many others are suffering this very minute. The numbers are growing by dozens, then hundreds in your city alone. The poor die faster, their homes closer to the filth. But the rich aren't immune. Money buys thicker curtains, not safer water. You drift in and out of sleep, dreamless, the kind of sleep where your body floats without anchor. When you wake, the doctor's back. He looks surprised to see you awake. That's always encouraging. He suggests a new tonic. Something involving quinine and dried orange peel. You drink it because what else is there? It tastes like bitter hope and rust. Outside, the sun rises. Your body hasn't given up yet. But you know now, deeply, irrevocably, that doctors are guessing. They mean well, most of them. But they're treating shadows. And cholera is a creature that slips between fingers, diagnoses, and good intentions alike. You sit up slowly. You're still alive. For now, and tomorrow, you might even try not to drink the water. You open your eyes to sunlight filtering through dusty panes, catching little motes of air that dance like invisible spores. You breathe in cautiously, and not just because you're still recovering from your appointment with Dr. Bleed You and leave. No, today you're keenly aware of what might be in the air. Because even though your water might be poison, the real villain everyone fears, that would be miasma. You sit up cautiously, and someone hands you a posy. Just a small bundle of herbs, lavender, mint, maybe a scrap of citrus peel tied with ribbon. It smells pleasant, sure, but it's not for pleasure. It's for protection. You're supposed to hold it to your nose as you move about your house, shielding your delicate inner workings from the bad air that Victorian society believes is carrying cholera straight to your lungs. The miasma theory reigns supreme. Here, floated confidently by doctors, clergymen, sanitation boards, and every middle-aged matron with a decorative bonnet and unsolicited advice. According to the theory, illness is born in foul-smelling air, specifically the kind wafting up from rotting organic matter, open sewers, and overly enthusiastic flower beds. If it smells bad, it's dangerous. If it smells good, you're probably safe. It's medicine by nose. Historians still argue whether this theory delayed or hastened effective cholera intervention. On one hand, it led to massive cleaning campaigns. On the other, it distracted everyone from fixing actual contamination sources. Still, the belief had staying power. Even when germ theory whispered, maybe it's the bacteria, miasma screamed, nope, it's that pile of turnips next to the fishmonger. You rise from your bed, feet touching the cold floorboards, and shuffle over to your window. You consider opening it, but pause, because outside is the smell. A heavy sour mix of soot, horse, ash, and humanity that clings to your clothes and creeps into your linens. Servants, bless them, are fighting this invisible war with vinegar buckets and burnt sugar. Some homes go so far as to hang fresh pine branches over the fireplace to purify the drawing room. Others burn dried orange, peels in metal trays. The truly dedicated leave bowls of camphor in every corner, turning the entire house into a faintly medicinal nightmare that smells like sick-room cough drops and regret. And the elite? They take miasma avoidance to luxurious new heights. Think velvet-lined carriages with perfumed vents, charcoal-filled corsets, scented gloves. One fashionable gentleman was known to wear a pomander the size of a grapefruit, suspended around his neck like a statement necklace. Functional and fabulous. You reach for your own handkerchief, starched linen, embroidered initials, dabbed with a bit of lavender oil. It's your everyday defense against invisible death. People carry these like talismans, holding them under their noses whenever they pass a suspicious drain or an unwashed butcher. You do the same, even though you're starting to suspect the truth might lie somewhere murkier. Still, the city tries. Officials commission fumigation squads who wander the streets burning sulfur, pouring lime into cesspools, and waving burning tar-soaked ropes. You don't know whether to thank them or beg them to stop making things worse. The air smells cleaner, sure, but the death toll isn't dropping. You wander into your parlor, where the windows have been closed and curtained for days. There's a parrot in a cage by the fireplace. It's not yours. It belongs to a visiting cousin who insists it senses miasma changes before anyone else. The parrot screeches and promptly poops. Everyone takes it as an omen. Here's a quirky little fringe fact for your trouble. Some households tried ozone boxes, essentially early air purifiers filled with chemicals designed to pump healthy air into the room. Most of them malfunctioned, leaked, or smelled like burned shoe polish. One set fire to a lace tablecloth. Another made the butler faint. But for a brief, shining moment, everyone believed salvation might come from a brass box that hissed like an angry cat. And while you're here, let's talk fashion, specifically miasma-proof fashion. Wide skirts with inner linings soaked in rosewater, cloaks impregnated with herbs. A few daring ladies stitched thyme leaves into their petticoats. Perfume wasn't just for attraction, it was armor. Smelling like death was a faux pas. Smelling near death was a liability. Still, despite all the lace and lavender, the logic has holes. You begin to notice things. People who never leave their houses getting sick anyway. Rooms that smell lovely, but still end up draped in black crepe. And then there's the pastor down the road who insists fresh air is divine and who keeps his windows open day and night. He's fine. His entire family is fine. And yet they live a stone's throw from the slaughterhouse. You begin to wonder, what if it's not the air? But you don't say that out loud. You tuck the thought away, like a heretical pebble in your mental shoe. For now, you play your part. You nod as your aunt discusses the neighbor who caught a terrible whiff near the docks and died 2 days later. You agree with the apothecary who recommends eucalyptus-soaked foot pads. You wear your gloves. You sniff your handkerchief. You burn your orange peels. Because while the miasma theory might be wrong, it feels right. It offers rules, rituals, the comfort of control in a world you can't explain. And when you live in the time of cholera, sometimes that illusion is the only thing keeping you upright. Outside, the wind shifts. A carriage rattles past, wheels slicing through a puddle that should not be that color. You press your posy to your face and breathe deep. The scent is clean, safe, familiar. If death is in the air, at least you're wearing the right perfume. You open the door and step into the street, feeling oddly regal in your miasma-fighting gloves and sprig of mint tucked into your coat. It's early, cool, almost quiet, until you hear the first cough. You glance instinctively toward it, and there it is again. Not dramatic, just sharp, wet, low. Someone 2 doors down is already folding under the weight of what you hope is just a bad night's sleep. But you know better. You walk on, boots crunching over gravel and grime, wondering, just for a moment, if your social standing might protect you. You're well-dressed, you're educated, you're clean, by Victorian standards. Surely cholera prefers back alleys and broken shoes. Nope, not even close. Because in this disease's eyes, you're just another warm, hydrated host. Rich or poor, cholera doesn't care if your home has wallpaper imported from Paris or soot-stained stone walls crumbling in on themselves. And while it's easier to catch it in a slum packed like a shipping crate, that doesn't mean the upper crust is immune. Not by a long shot. In fact, you'd be surprised how many prominent citizens end up flat on their backs, whispering regrets, and smelling faintly of camphor. Lawyers, landowners, even minor royals, cholera has no manners. It knocks on your bow front door, slinks across your drawing room, and lays you out across your four-poster with the same indifference it shows to the man who sharpens knives for bread crusts. You walk by a row of houses, some shuttered, some airing linens. The nice part of town, or what passes for it in this gaslit purgatory. And yet, the black crepe bows on the doors are multiplying. 1, 2, 5. You start to lose count. Historians still argue whether the elite's access to cleaner water sources actually helped, or if their hygiene rituals just made them feel safer. Many of their homes had indoor cisterns or private pumps, but those still drew from the same underground stew as the poorer districts. It was class-based false confidence, sold by brass taps and floral soaps. A maid crosses your path, arms full of damp sheets. She nods politely, but her face is pale, strained. She works in a house that's lost 3 people this week. You know, because everyone knows. Gossip travels faster than germs, and in cholera season, it's just a different kind of infection. Meanwhile, in the poorer quarters, it's carnage. Whole families sick at once, crammed into one-room flats where the water jug is also the vomit bucket, and the only exit leads to a street full of open drains and desperation. The word filth is often tossed around by the wealthy, but what they miss is this: no one wants to live in filth. Poverty just doesn't offer many alternatives. You pass a small church, its bell tolling at half volume. They've slowed the ringing to avoid panic, but everyone knows what it means. Funerals are stacking up, coffins are reused, the grave diggers are working overtime and underpaid. You shiver, even though the sun is warm on your back. Here's a quirky, morbid little detail for you. In some towns, wealthier citizens would bribe the undertaker to ensure they weren't buried next to common corpses. That's right. Segregation extended to the afterlife. Plots were auctioned like theater seats, and if you were lucky, your family would pay for a headstone that was not accidentally recycled from last week's dearly departed shoemaker. Meanwhile, back among the drawing rooms and conservatories, there's denial dressed up in lace. Parties still happen, albeit nervously. Crystal glasses clink. Conversations pause when someone sneezes. The piano plays slower. No one dares say the word cholera unless they're whispering it into a brandy glass. You attend one such gathering. Polished silver. Roast duck. A centerpiece made entirely of lavender and hope. The hostess wears a silk dress embroidered with tiny violets. Morning chic. Fashionable and just somber enough to say, I'm aware of the crisis, but not a part of it. Someone toasts to continued health. You raise your glass, but your throat tightens. You've seen too much. You know that wealth is just comfort, not protection. It buys time, not immunity. And behind all this excess is fear so thick it fogs the crystal. You excuse yourself and step outside. The night air is heavy, but less perfumed than inside. You breathe. It's not clean, not really, but it's real. Honest, in a grimy sort of way. And just then, you remember a detail. Someone you met at the pump. A well-dressed man with a gold watch and impeccable posture. He coughed once. He said he didn't feel great, but he was probably just tired. You find out the next day he's dead. Less than 48 hours. Collapsed in his study, surrounded by unopened letters and untouched tea. That's how fast it works. That's how little it cares. You return home, suddenly aware of how fragile your walls are, how little separates you from the other parts of town. All it takes is one drop, one touch, one quiet sip from the wrong cup. And suddenly, your title means nothing. Your carpets, your books, your oil paintings of heroic ancestors, they all blur into background noise when your body starts to fail. You close the door behind you, lock it, pull the curtains, as if that ever helped anyone. You wake to the sound of wheels grating against cobblestone. A slow, heavy rumble that carries the weight of grief and something far more pungent. You creep to the window and peer through the warped glass. Outside, a cart trundles along, pulled by a horse that looks just as exhausted as the man guiding it. Behind them, the outline of something covered by a rough sheet. Maybe a body, maybe three. It's a sick cart, or a death cart. Sometimes they're the same thing. In times of peak outbreak, these carts circle neighborhoods like mournful delivery men, collecting the dying and the already dead with barely a pause. You don't call them unless it's serious. And by serious, we mean someone's already blue. You descend the stairs quietly. The house is still. But you hear voices from the kitchen, low, tense, probably arguing about whether to report the servant girl's fever or hide it until she either recovers or doesn't. You've seen this before. No one wants to be the household that ends up on the marked list. It starts with an ill maid, then a chalked X on your door, then men in black coats hauling someone out by the ankles. If you're lucky, you get sent to a cholera hospital. If you're lucky, you step outside, inhaling carefully. The cart is stopped across the street now. A woman's weeping into her apron. Two men lift a pale, limp figure onto the cart's flatbed. There's no ceremony, no prayers, just a moment of silence while the sheet is tucked in, like a grotesque bedtime routine. Historians still argue whether these carts served as mercy or menace. They helped prevent contagion, yes, but they also struck terror. People believed once you left your home for the sick house, you'd never return, which, to be fair, was mostly true. And those hospitals, let's talk about those. You imagine them as places of care, healing, perhaps a nurse in crisp linen humming by your bedside. Try again. Picture a cold, echoing building, rows of iron beds, side by side. No privacy, no quiet, just groaning, coughing, the occasional scream. The air smells of lye, sweat, and something sickly sweet no one wants to name. Nurses work until they drop. Or die. There's barely time to clean the sheets between patients. If you bring in your own blanket, it may walk out with someone else. Or never walk out at all. And the worst part? You might not even be that sick when you arrive. But being there, surrounded by every stage of cholera, means your odds of recovery just halved. That's why so many families hide the sick. Tuck them away in back rooms, feed them soup, and say nothing to the neighbors. Hope and hush are stronger than laudanum. Still, some go willingly. There's honor, they say, in not infecting the whole household. One man you knew, a bookseller, walked himself to the hospital with his coat buttoned wrong and his will in his pocket. He didn't make it halfway before collapsing on the curb. You walk down the street, head lowered, and nearly trip over a pile of lime. Not uncommon. City officials scatter it like holy dust over suspicious corners, alleys, gutters, places where sick bodies were recently removed. It's meant to purify, but it mostly looks like the city's been sneezing chalk. Here's a quirky detail for you. One well-meaning town council attempted to sanitize the streets by boiling vinegar in cauldrons placed at major intersections. The result? A city that smelled like salad and continued dying at the exact same rate. You step around another lime patch and pause in front of a sick house. It's quiet, unnervingly so. The windows are fogged. A small crowd gathers by the front gate, some crying, others stone-faced. A boy's trying to peer in, standing on tiptoe, straining for a glimpse of his brother. No one stops him. Inside, you know what it looks like. Faces pale and pinched, mouths stained from vomiting or the tinctures meant to stop it. Stomachs caved in, eyes glassy. The doctors mean well, mostly, but it's battlefield medicine. Keepy, them breathing. If not, clear the bed. You hear a noise behind you and turn just in time to see another cart approaching. This one's smaller. For children. You look away. Back home, you remove your shoes at the door. You've walked on too much that shouldn't be on streets. Your maid eyes you nervously and places a basin by the threshold. Carbolic acid. You dip your hands without asking. Even the clean houses smell like hospitals now. Everyone's trying. No, one knows what they're doing. One neighbor insists on burning onion skins every night. Another sleeps upright in a chair, convinced it keeps the illness from settling in the lungs. You hear that a widow down the road has taken to sleeping in her root cellar. She says the earth feels safer, and maybe it is. Your home feels smaller lately, the walls thinner. You notice every cough, every step. You start wondering which members of your family could survive on their own, and which couldn't. It's a horrible thought. But when the sick cart rolls by twice in one day, you start planning things you never wanted to plan. That night, as you lie in bed, you hear another cart. This one doesn't stop, just rattles past, a wheel squeaking like a violin string being stretched too tight. You listen to it until the sound fades into the hum of night. You breathe deeply, carefully, and you think about the bookseller, about the girl down the road, about the hospital beds with no names attached, and you hope, selfishly, silently, that your door never gets chalked. You wake to the unmistakable scent of something wrong. Not illness, not miasma, though that's there too, but something sharper, fouler, more intimate. You rise slowly, cross to the window, and realize what's happening before you even see it. The night soil men are back. They're moving like silent assassins through the alley behind your house, hauling barrels filled with waste, human waste, buckets, chamber pots, cesspits dredged and drained in the small hours while most of the city pretends this part of life doesn't exist. But it does, and it smells like a punishment. The night soil men are a breed of their own, hardened by necessity, invisible by design. You don't talk to them, you don't tip them. You just hope they're efficient and don't spill anything, because what they carry could kill you. You press your face to the glass. They're lean, soot-faced, wearing gloves that might have once been white. Their carts creak under the weight of sloshing barrels, the contents of which you absolutely do not want to contemplate. One of the men pauses to scratch his neck with the back of his wrist. Another lights a pipe. The stench doesn't seem to bother them, but it bothers you and everyone else. The city's waste has to go somewhere, but most of the time it doesn't go far. Some of it ends up in rivers, some in cesspits behind houses, some in shallow trenches charmingly called soil reservoirs. One memorable load last month ended up dumped in a vacant lot that just so happened to sit above a groundwater source. Historians still argue whether the night soil trade delayed the construction of proper sewage systems or actually kept things from getting even worse. It's hard to say. But what's clear is that these men were part of a system designed to scrape filth from the surface and push it just out of view, never far, never safely. You pull your dressing gown tighter. Somewhere below, a barrel sloshes. You hear it. You feel it. You gag, just a little. Not dramatically, just enough to remind yourself that you live in a time where a man could catch cholera from his own front step. Here's your fun fringe tidbit for the night. One town tried mixing its waste with powdered chalk and selling it as fertilizer. They called it sanitary compost. Gardeners loved it, right up until the outbreak started and everyone realized they were literally growing tomatoes in death juice. You finally step back from the window. You don't want to see what happens when a barrel leaks, because they do, sometimes slowly, sometimes explosively. One poor household had a full nightjar rupture beneath the staircase, soaking the floorboards and causing an odor so persistent the family moved out. That house still hasn't sold, and it's not just the night soil men. Your own house has a problem, and you know it. The downstairs water closet is acting up again. It's supposed to be modern, flushable, self-cleansing, piped straight into an underground brick tunnel lined with noble intentions. But sometimes in the middle of the night it gurgles. Gurgling is bad. You send for a plumber, which means summoning a man who smells of clay, pipe smoke, and thinly veiled judgment. He arrives with a spanner, a small shovel, and more confidence than your doctor. He inspects your pipes and announces that your cesspit is overexcited, whatever that means. He'll fix it, he says, for a price. You pay it. That night you avoid the downstairs loo. Instead, you use a chamber pot like it's 1740. You do it gingerly. You light 2 candles. You carry it to the kitchen and pray no one sees you. Because the one thing worse than having cholera is having someone think you're responsible for it. You set the pot near the door for the servants to discreetly empty. But in the morning, it's still there. You ask your maid, who turns pale. She says she thought it was already taken out. It wasn't, and now there's a faint puddle. You nearly faint. You summon the household to a private council. You talk of hygiene, of protocols, of containment. No one says cholera, but everyone is thinking it. You double the vinegar budget. You order more lavender oil. You replace the rug. By noon, the pot is gone. You burn the cloth it sat on. You open every window and begin to reconsider the value of simply never drinking again. But the city's not helping. Outside, gutters overflow. Rain carries waste downhill. The streets smell worse than they did a week ago. And the night soil men? Still working. Still hauling disease in barrels with leaky seams and too much mileage. You overhear someone in the tea room mention a new plan from the city council. Something about a centralized sewage system. It sounds expensive, futuristic, impossible. You laugh politely and excuse yourself. But later that night in bed, you think about it again. What if the solution is moving all of this waste away? Not hiding it, not sprinkling it with chalk and pretending it's gone, but building something real, something with pipes and water and rules. A system that doesn't rely on a man with a wagon and a low gag threshold. It's a nice dream, and maybe someday it'll be real. But for now, you sleep with a cloth over your mouth. Not because it helps, but because it makes you feel like you're trying. You hear the night soil cart one last time, just before you drift off. It creaks, sloshes, and rattles away into the dark. And you think, not for the first time, that we built cities too fast and sewers too late. You wake up feeling wrong. Not just groggy or thirsty or vaguely unsettled. No, this is deeper. Your bones feel too heavy for your skin. Your limbs don't listen the way they should. You sit up slowly and realize, with a dread that creeps, like fog under a door, that something inside you is shifting, and not in a poetic coming-of-age way. You throw off the covers and your mouth goes dry. Not from thirst, but from a sudden and terrifying awareness that your body is no longer a reliable ally. The nausea hits like a low tide, dragging you forward, and you barely make it to the basin. Your stomach twists, and the contents of last night's weak broth, or was it bread, hurtle out in a sickening rush. Then again, and again. You're not imagining it anymore. This is the beginning. Someone knocks. You try to answer, but the words come out wet and garbled. Your maid peeks in, eyes wide with recognition. She doesn't step inside. You manage to croak, "Don't call the doctor," because you know what happens next. Once the sickness is out. In the open, once someone declares it officially, it takes on a life of its own. The rules change. The air around you thickens. Doors shut that don't reopen. And worst of all, someone might chalk your door. The dreaded X, it starts faintly. Your family denies it. It must be food poisoning, a chill, a stomach wind. But, you know, your body tells you in 100 tiny ways. The tightness, the dryness, the way your skin already feels loose around the bones. Historians still argue whether the fear of premature burial or of isolation wards was stronger in this era. It's a close race. You see, cholera moves fast, but rumors move faster. And somewhere along the line, those two things collided and gave birth to one of the strangest, saddest chapters in medical history. People being buried alive. You lie back, on your damp pillow, trying not to imagine it, but of course you do, waking in a coffin, gasping for air, scratching at the lid. The stories are everywhere. A child waking mid-funeral, a widow knocking from beneath the soil. Some of them are real, some exaggerated, but all of them stick to your ribs like a bad dream. In fact, the fear grew so widespread that entire industries sprouted around it. One quirky and genuinely disturbing solution was the safety coffin. These were real patented contraptions fitted with bells, flags, and breathing tubes. Some even had glass viewing panels or pull ropes linked to a nearby watchman's station. You imagine lying in one of those, pulling frantically on a cord as the grave dirt settles above you. Not a comforting image. A few very wealthy individuals paid for mausoleums with interior release mechanisms. Levers, secret exits, a spare candle and flask of sherry. Because nothing says confidence like preparing to dig yourself out of your own death. You, mercifully, are still above ground. But that doesn't mean you're safe. You drift in and out of consciousness as the day unfolds in a blur of damp cloths and whispered arguments. Someone forces a spoonful of something chalky between your lips. You spit it out. The walls breathe with you, expanding and contracting. By evening, a physician is summoned, despite your earlier protest. He arrives, gloved and pale. He takes one look at you and sighs through his nose. It's the sound of someone who's seen too many dying people to pretend anymore. He doesn't bleed you, doesn't blister you. Maybe he's one of the new ones, the ones who are beginning to suspect that less is more. He leaves you with a small vial of laudanum and instructions to keep the bowels warm, whatever that means. You spend the night somewhere between sleep and a state too awake to be restful. You hear voices, real and imagined. Someone talks about arrangements. Someone else mentions your will. Your cousin asks about your silver. That last one might have been a dream. Then, silence. And when you wake, somehow, miraculously, you're still here. Still in your room, still wrapped in the smell of linen and lemon balm and your own sweat. You feel lighter, emptier, like someone's scooped out part of you and hasn't yet decided whether to fill it back in. A maid peers in. She sees your eyes open and gasps. "They said you wouldn't make it," she whispers. You try to smile. You don't succeed. Word spreads quickly. Within the hour, someone's scrubbing the front steps. Your bedclothes are burned. A new chamber pot is brought in. Blessed, probably, and unnecessarily fancy. You are fed broth with a spoon that looks like it came from a baptismal set. It's official now. You're a survivor. And yet people still glance at you like you might not be. Because here's the twisted irony. Some recover from cholera only to die of something else days later. Heart failure, sepsis, plain exhaustion. Your body is drained like a wrung rag, and rebuilding takes more strength than most people have. But you're still here, still listening to the carts outside, still hearing stories of coffins fitted with bells, still wondering whether you might hear one ring. You close your eyes and drift, not fully asleep, but not fully alive either. Somewhere in that strange borderland where memories get sticky and time gets soft, and when you finally sleep, you dream of a bell above your grave, ringing. Not because you were buried, but because you weren't. You don't die. That's the miracle. Or the cosmic accident. Or maybe it's the consequence of dumb, stubborn luck. But you live, and that means one thing. Now you have to deal with the aftermath. Recovery is its own kind of horror, especially in the time of cholera. You're pale, brittle, and perpetually cold, like a porcelain figurine someone dropped and tried to glue back together. Your appetite is gone. Your bones feel distant. But you're breathing, and in this city, in this year, that puts you in rare company. There's something strange about surviving when others didn't. It earns you attention, sure, but also suspicion. You're suddenly a point of curiosity, an object lesson. People stare at you in the market like you've come back from the dead. In fact, some think you did. And with all this swirling death, it's no surprise what the living turn to next. Mourning. Victorian mourning is not just a reaction. It's an institution. You step out for your first walk in days, and the streets are lined with black. Bows on doors, crepe-draped windows, women in veils so thick they look like shadows walking through daylight. Mourning isn't just for the heart, it's for the eyes. If you don't dress your grief properly, people assume you didn't feel it at all, and there are rules. Oh, the rules. Widows mourn for 2 years. 2. With stages, full mourning, half mourning, and something called slightly less tragic mauve. Children, 6 months, cousins, a reasonable fortnight. If you sneeze at the wrong funeral wearing lilac, expect to be socially exiled. You observe all this from behind your own veil, literal or otherwise. You pass shops filled with mourning attire, jet bead necklaces, black silk gloves, parasols that look like bat wings. Some people are clearly thriving in this niche. Others look like they've aged 20 years in 2 weeks. Historians still argue whether this culture of grief provided emotional structure or just a fashionable form of repression. Perhaps both, because in the time of cholera, people needed something to hold on to, and sometimes that something was a lace-trimmed handkerchief soaked in tears and arsenic-based dye. You stop in front of a small procession on the cobblestone street. A child's coffin, white and edged with ribbons, is carried past by grim-faced men. Behind it, a pair of parents walk stiffly, their faces blank, their hands locked in each other's. You step aside, eyes lowered, posy to your nose. You don't know them. You've never seen them before. But you could be them, easily. The coffin is placed into a modest black cart. A few more family members climb in, and then they're off, rattling slowly toward a cemetery that ran out of proper room. Last week, the gravediggers are working in shifts. There's talk of shared plots, and somewhere out there, a man is building more coffins than chairs. Funerals have become almost daily events. Your household has received more black-bordered invitations in 1 month than birthday cards all year. You attend a few out of duty. You bring flowers, white, never red. You avoid speaking to the bereaved unless spoken to. And you don't, under any circumstance, smile. But there's another side to mourning that you start to notice. A strange, gleaming industry under all that crep. Shops open that specialize in mourning accessories, jet cameos, hair jewelry. Yes, actual locks of hair braided into brooches or encased in lockets. One girl you meet wears a bracelet made from her fiancé's beard. She twists it when she's nervous. And the photographers, oh, they're busy. Memento mori portraits flood the market. You see them in every drawing room now, black and white photos of the dead, carefully posed like they're napping or caught mid-thought. Sometimes they're photographed with the living, seated beside sisters, held by mothers, propped up by stands hidden under skirts. You pass a photography studio offering instant morning sittings and shiver a little. Here's a curious little detail. Some people didn't wait for others to die. They staged their own funerals, alive, as practice. You hear of one eccentric dowager who held a full procession, complete with a carriage and choir, just to see who would attend. She was disappointed, apparently. Too many absences. Back home, your household prepares its own memorial touches. Someone pins black ribbons to the lamps. Your aunt begins wearing widow's weeds, just in case. You overhear your uncle dictating his obituary to a typist in the library. He's not sick. He's just planning ahead. You, the lucky one, are expected to behave with a kind of dignified sadness. Don't laugh too loudly. Don't wear bright colors. Don't go anywhere frivolous. You are the survivor. Your continued breathing is a responsibility, and yet, some can't take it anymore. You hear whispers of people sneaking out of mourning clothes just to dance, to drink, to pretend that for a night they are still alive and allowed to enjoy it. You understand. The black can start to seep in, not just into your wardrobe, but into your bones. You return to your room that evening and find a fresh black sash laid across your bed. Your cousin has died, the one who always brought strawberries on Sundays. You tie the sash around your arm and sit in silence for a while. The room smells faintly of starch and soot. A candle flickers. Outside, the bells begin to toll again. 3 slow chimes. Then 4. Then 5. You've lost count of how many you've heard. You wake the next morning and immediately regret it. Not because you're sick, though your stomach still isn't fully trustworthy, but because something in the air tells you today will be worse than most. It starts with a sound, a low boom, far off, followed by a kind of splatter you can almost feel in your teeth. You sit up, blink, and realize what it means. The latrine exploded. Not yours, thank heaven, but someone's. You shuffle toward the window, dreading what you'll see, and yet, like everyone else in this disease-haunted city, unable to look away. Sure enough, down the block, a half-collapsed outhouse is belching smoke and shame into the sky. The surrounding crowd has that specific posture of people torn between laughing and dry heaving. Apparently, someone thought pouring quicklime into a full privy was a good idea. Quicklime, when mixed with certain contents, has a tendency to heat rapidly. That's chemistry for you. Terrifying and still somehow not banned. You pull your dressing gown tighter and wince. Because this is the latest development in the war against filth, desperate sanitation measures. Improvised, underfunded, and usually conducted by people who don't know science from superstition. Across the city, latrines are overfull. Cesspits are backing up into kitchens. Chamber pots slosh in hallways. And in the name of public health, every possible solution is being tested. Most of them involve things that burn, fizz, or smell like the inside of an apothecary's boot. Historians still argue whether these improvised methods delayed meaningful sewage reform or bought just enough time for reformers to rally. What's clear is that Victorian plumbing, especially in its transitional phase, was a gamble. You either had nothing or you had something that pretended to help and secretly made things worse. You look around your own home and notice the signs. The drains have started bubbling again. The downstairs water closet smells faintly of eggs and panic. The servants are scrubbing everything with a little too much urgency. Someone has brought in a new contraption, a sanitary siphon flush, made from shiny copper and more optimism than engineering. It's supposed to carry waste away more efficiently, except when it doesn't. Last week, one house had its entire parlor flooded when the pipes decided to reverse direction. You make a mental note. Avoid using the second-floor loo until further notice. It wasn't always this way. In simpler times, you had the chamber pot and the night soil man. Smelly, yes, but straightforward. But now it's water closets, pressure valves, and something called trap sealing, which sounds like a magic spell but usually means the gas is about to leak. And then there's the thunderboxes. Those terrifying wooden cabinets with a hole in the middle and a dark pit beneath. If you're lucky, the lid fits snug. If you're unlucky, a rat pops up mid-business and challenges you for dominance. Quirky fact of the day. In one particularly ill-fated estate, a water closet was placed directly above the dining room chandelier. The pipe failed during a luncheon. The result was exactly what you're imagining. No amount of embroidery or red wine could make people forget. You walk outside and are nearly knocked over by the reek. Someone's attempting to drain a street by sweeping liquid waste into the gutter with a broom and the fervor of a man praying he doesn't splash himself. Another gentleman, nose buried in a handbook titled Sanitation and Social Order, is shaking his head and muttering. You overhear him say, "The latrines are turning on us." And it's true. Victorian toilets are in open rebellion. Every attempt to tame them, through lime, boiling water, elaborate flushing systems, just leads to new problems. Pipes freeze, cesspits explode, smells invade parlors and ruin otherwise respectable tea times. You think about your neighbor, the one who had his house retrofitted with a latest model self-cleansing lavatory. He was so proud, until the pressure built up and it ejected its contents with enough force to knock a painting off the wall. The painting was of a saint. You can't make this up. Still, the problem is bigger than broken pipes. It's the whole idea of waste, and how people pretend it doesn't exist. Elite families talk about illness and death in hushed tones, but no one talks about where it all ends up, and so it piles up, under streets, behind houses, in basements, waiting for just enough rain to flood upward, and when it does, the cholera returns. You step back into your house and find the cook arguing with a plumber over the kitchen drain. It's gurgling again, and she's convinced it's a sign of doom. The plumber agrees. They pour scalding water down the sink and pray. By afternoon, the house smells faintly of soap, boiled herbs, and dread. A pot of lavender water simmers on the stove, perfuming the air like that'll stop microbes from staging a revolution. You lie down and stare at the ceiling. The chandelier up there shakes slightly. Probably just wind, or a subtle reminder that the pipes are still above you, always watching, always scheming. And you can't help but laugh, just a little, because this is what it's come to. Fighting, a war with chamber pots and air fresheners, and losing. The night comes, cool and damp. You light a candle and tuck a small bundle of mint leaves into your sleeve, just in case. And as you drift off to sleep, you listen carefully, not for ghosts. Not for burglars, but for bubbling. Because in the time of cholera, the enemy doesn't always knock. Sometimes it climbs. You sit at the edge of your bed the next morning, hands folded, eyes on the floor, waiting for someone, anyone, to explain what the plan is now. Because the pipes are rebelling, the streets are weeping sewage, and the doctor's been missing for 3 days. So naturally, the people turn to the next best thing, prayer and charlatans. Oh yes. When cholera starts knocking and the medical community is mostly stabbing in the dark with leeches and calomel, people start looking upward and sideways, and occasionally just straight into a bottle of turpentine labeled cure. You glance over at the family Bible, sitting beside a slightly melted beeswax candle and your cousin's newest tonic, a mysterious green liquid that smells like cloves and possibly regret. This is the era of home remedies, miracle elixirs, and loud men in tall hats selling salvation out of wooden carts. Faith healers, herbalists, and electromagnetic doctors pop up like mushrooms after a downpour. Each one promises a unique cure for the cholera plague, and each one asks for a modest fee in return. It's like a macabre marketplace of hope. You pass one on your morning walk, barely recovered but restless. The man set up a little table in the square, stacked with bottles of every shape and opacity. He waves a feathered hat, calls out in a voice hoarse from overuse or bad whiskey, and offers you a sample of his revivifying elixir. He claims it's made from the inner bark of a Norwegian tree, crushed pearls, and a secret ingredient. Only the angels know. It tastes like licorice and lighter fluid. You decline. Here's your fringe fact of the day. One actual remedy being sold in this era was made from vinegar, chalk, and powdered rhubarb. It claimed to settle the humors and restore dignity to the bowels. It mostly just gave people gritty, fruity diarrhea. Back home, your great-aunt has started boiling herbs on the stove again. She's not entirely sure which ones. She just calls them the good ones. The house smells like mint, rosemary, and simmering confusion. Your uncle, meanwhile, has decided prayer is the best defense. He assembles the household each morning to recite Psalm 91 in a voice that gets shakier with each passing day. Someone coughs halfway through the second verse and everyone flinches. You can't blame them, really. In a world where the authorities are guessing and the doctors are vanishing, people want something, anything, to believe in. And religion? Well, that has structure, comfort, and no laudanum side effects. Historians still argue whether organized religion calmed communities during the cholera outbreaks or fueled moral panic. Churches filled with the grieving and hopeful became hotbeds of both comfort and contagion. People crammed in to pray, cry, confess, and sometimes to cough. You walk past a chapel on your way through town. Outside, a sign reads, "Special Service for the afflicted." You don't go in. You've seen what happens when a single sick person sneezes into a crowd of 70 hymn-singing mourners. That's not salvation. That's a super spreader. But it's not all prayer and potions. Some folks go a little off-book. There's a woman down the lane who reads tea leaves and swears she can spot early signs of illness in the shape of a floating leaf. You brought her weak tea once out of curiosity. She peered in, squinted, and told you to avoid fish and your mother-in-law. Only one of those turned out to be good advice. Another man, a retired chimney sweep with far too much time and even more vinegar, has taken to dousing the street with homemade disinfectant. It's mostly gin and ash water. He's convinced it's working. You walk a little faster when you see him. And then there are the charm makers. Amulets sold by candlelight, inscribed with sigils or stamped with prayers. You even wear one, secretly, a little tin coin etched with a Latin phrase that probably means, "Please don't die." Your maid says hers hums when danger's near. You don't believe her, but you also don't argue, because in the time of cholera, even nonsense feels like insurance. Still, the desperation is wearing thin. People are losing faith, not just in doctors, but in divine mercy. Whole communities are starting to fray. One man was caught defacing a rival's prayer card, claiming it siphoned blessings. Another tried to sell a piece of cloth said to have been wrapped around a saint's toe. It turned out to be curtain fringe. You return home and find a new remedy on your bedside table, left by your cousin, no doubt. This one's called Dr. Balfour's Invigorating Drops. It boasts a label promising to strengthen the blood, restore intestinal elegance, and prevent terminal melancholy. You turn the bottle over and find it's mostly rum, with a hint of rhubarb. You leave it there. That night your aunt lights a bundle of herbs and waves it over the dinner table. The housekeeper mutters something about spirits. Your uncle makes another speech about moral clarity. Someone sets out a bowl of salt to absorb illness. You're surrounded by layers of faith, fear, and folklore so thick you could stuff a mattress with them. You go to bed not cured, but cocooned. In prayer, in plaster, in every kind of belief except certainty. And as you drift off, the taste of last week's cure still faint on your tongue, you wonder, would it be so bad? To try the sherry-soaked angel dust recipe? You'll sleep on it. You wake with the unsettling sense that you've missed something important. The air in the room feels too still, too deliberate. No clinking of teacups, no footsteps from the hall, no overcooked porridge wafting up from the kitchen. Just silence, unnatural and dense, like the house is holding its breath. You rise, creak open the door, and listen. Then you hear it, scratching, soft at first, like a broom over old wood, then louder, panicked, clawing. You rush to the drawing room and stop dead. The maid is dragging furniture in front of the front door, a chair, a heavy vase, the umbrella. Stand. She's pale, sweaty, and doesn't even look at you as she jams a hat rack into the keyhole like a makeshift wooden spear. You ask what she's doing. She whispers, "They're coming." You blink. Who's coming? And that's when she says it, in a voice you barely recognize. Strangers. You feel a chill slide down your back. Because in this time of cholera, strangers aren't just unknown. They're contaminated. People have stopped trusting outsiders, or neighbors, or anyone, really, who doesn't live inside the same four walls. You begin to see it everywhere. Doors slammed shut, windows papered over, letters, those glorious paper lifelines, burned before reading, because what if the disease rides in on the ink? Historians still argue whether this paranoid isolation saved lives or fractured communities beyond repair. On the one hand, limiting contact probably helped. On the other, it bred fear sharper than any fever. People began to see each other not as fellow victims, but as carriers, suspects, walking risks. You peek out the window and see what sparked the barricade. A group of tradesmen is going door to door, offering supplies from a handcart, fresh, bread, clean water, candles. And while that sounds helpful, they're not local. And in the current climate, not local means possibly lethal. One neighbor slams her window shut as they approach. Another shouts from behind a closed door, telling them to move on or be reported. The tradesmen nod grimly and move on, their cart creaking in protest. You don't wave. You want to, but you don't. This fear of outsiders is everywhere now. Villages post guards at crossroads. Town criers announce curfews. Entire streets seal themselves off with nailed-up boards and crude signs that read "No entry, plague." Your uncle starts keeping a stick by the door. Not a walking stick, a thumping stick. In case someone breaks in, he says, adjusting his dressing gown with a faint twitch. You don't ask whether he means thieves or neighbors. People begin to watch each other differently too. Every cough becomes a scandal. Every sneeze, an accusation. A woman was shouted out of the bakery yesterday because she touched a loaf and then put it back. You watch the whole scene from across the square, frozen in place, as if her fingertips alone could condemn you all. Inside homes, the paranoia grows thick as soot. One servant is caught washing only once before bed, and someone suggests quarantine. Your aunt starts making lists, clean people versus suspected. It's meant to be helpful, but it feels like a game of moral triage. Here's your fringe tidbit for the day. In some neighborhoods, people hung garlic braids over their doorways, not for flavor or medicine, but to mark their homes as protected. Others hung small dolls soaked in vinegar. One bold family painted their threshold blue to confuse spirits. It didn't work. Even letters, those beautiful crinkly scraps of civilization, have become dangerous. Some households iron them before reading, others soak them in spirits. One woman you know refuses to read any correspondence unless it's been blessed by clergy and sealed in wax. You, meanwhile, still read your post. Quietly, alone. You burn it afterward, but you read it. That afternoon, a boy from down the road is caught throwing rocks at a delivery man. He's afraid, they say. The man was from the next borough. And that's all it takes these days. Different accent, wrong shoes, or, God forbid, a redder face than usual. That night, the streets are even quieter than before. Someone's playing a piano far off, muffled by too many curtains. You catch sight of a shadow on the rooftop across the way, probably a watchman or a particularly anxious widow standing vigil. Everyone's on edge. Your cousin begins sealing windows with melted wax and old linens. To keep the vapors out, she mutters. But you know what she means, to keep people out. You go to the kitchen, find your old nurse boiling rags in vinegar. She says it helps. She doesn't meet your eyes. You ask if she's scared. She says nothing, just wrings out a cloth with trembling fingers. Fear of the outsider becomes fear of everyone. A man refuses to let his own wife back into the house after she visits her sister. She might have picked something up, he says. The wife now lives in the garden shed. You hear of whole apartment buildings where the sick are locked in their rooms and the key thrown away. For their safety, they claim. But no one checks back in, and there's no shortage of blame. Foreigners, market vendors, beggars, Catholics, Protestants, Jews, the French, anyone but you. People start muttering that this is a punishment, that cholera is a cleanser, that some deserve it more than others. You want to scream. Instead, you light a candle and sit by the window. The curtain flutters in a breeze you don't remember inviting in. You sip tea that tastes like ashes. Somewhere in the distance you hear shouting. Then nothing. You don't move, because in the time of cholera, the greatest infection might not be in the water, but in the way people stop seeing each other as human. You wake to the sound of pen on paper, a soft, scratching rhythm, like a mouse pacing across parchment. Downstairs, someone is drawing. You wrap a shawl around your shoulders and follow the noise to the study, where you find him. That quiet man, with the tired eyes and the black coat. He's hunched over the table, sketching circles onto a large sheet of paper. Dots, more dots, lines. You've seen maps before, maps of cities, of railways, of the empire. But not like this. This one breathes. He glances up, nods, doesn't speak. You don't need him to, because you've heard whispers. Jon Snow is doing something no one else dares. He's tracking death like it's a thief that leaves footprints. And for once, someone is looking down, not up, not to the heavens, not to morality, but to the streets, the pumps, the puddles. You watch him ink a new circle near Broad Street, and just like that, the world begins to tilt. Snow isn't a flashy man. He doesn't peddle miracle cures or perform theatrical bleeds. He just observes, notes, asks questions no one wants to ask, like, where did you drink your water? And when did the vomiting start? It's unsettling, because for all the doctors shouting about bad air and miasmas and divine retribution, this man's answer is painfully simple: the pump. Historians still argue whether Snow's famous map, his death-dotted masterpiece, was the actual turning point, or just a symbol of one. But you know this. It felt different, because this wasn't a sermon or a superstition. It was data, in ink, with consequences. You lean over the table and trace the arc of death. It's there, stark as sunrise. The worst outbreaks spiral around a single water pump. One handle, one spout, one slow, dripping killer. The Broad Street pump. You know it well. Everyone does. It's a trusted friend. You filled a jug there once. Your maid goes every other morning. The water tastes better there, sweeter. That should have been the clue, but it wasn't. Because no one wants to believe something so basic, so essential, could betray you. Still, snow keeps marking. Each dot a person, each circle a home. You ask him how many. He doesn't answer right. Away. Just sighs. You don't press. Soon he takes his findings to the parish board. They laugh, scoff. One man calls it science fiction. Another says it's just coincidence. But a few, just a few, listen, and then, in a quiet act of rebellion, they remove the pump's handle. That's it. No ceremony, no announcement. Just a wrench, a twist, and the silent death of a beloved utility. And almost immediately, something shifts. The deaths don't stop, not yet, but they slow. People still talk about miasmas, about foul smells, about wrath. But the smarter ones start watching the water, testing it, rethinking the unthinkable. That afternoon, you walk to Broad Street. The pump is still there, handle gone, guarded like a fallen idol. A woman kneels beside it, crying. She says her husband only ever drank from this pump, that the water saved him. She doesn't know yet that it killed him. Nearby, a boy fills a bucket from a different source. He moves carefully, as if the water might bite. It just might. You return home and wash your hands with boiled water and carbolic soap. The bar is so harsh it smells like iron and bleaches your knuckles. You don't care. You scrub until your skin protests, because now you know. It's not the air, not bad thoughts, not even your cursed family bloodline. It's the water. Here's your quirky tidbit for the day. Some people refused to stop drinking from the Broad Street pump even after the handle was removed. They lowered cups on strings, argued with officials, claimed the water was healing. Some said the deaths were caused by grief, not germs. One woman blamed a malevolent comet. None of them blamed the pump. But you do. You light a candle for the lives lost, not to illness, but to ignorance. You don't cry. You're too tired, too brittle. That evening, Snow's map is passed around the neighborhood. You see it on parlor tables, in taverns, folded beneath jars of pickled onions. Some scoff. Others go very quiet. A few, just a few, begin to ask, where does our water come from? It's the beginning of something. You can feel it. A tiny seismic shift beneath your feet. A crack in the marble certainty that has ruled over disease for centuries. You still wear your mourning sash. Still sniff your posy. Still boil everything that touches your lips. But now when you hear someone coughing, you don't look to the sky. You look to the pump, and you whisper a name. Not a prayer. Not a saint. Just a man with a pen and a map who drew a line around death and made the world. Listen, Jon Snow. The days grow cooler, and so do the deaths. Not dramatically, not in some cinematic flourish with weeping bells and rain-slicked mourning veils fluttering in slow motion. No, it's subtler than that. A slow, collective exhale, a fading of the fever dream. People still die, but less often, and fewer at once. The cart doesn't roll by quite so frequently. The gravediggers are finally getting some sleep. You can feel the city shifting beneath your feet, like it's realizing, very slowly, that something has to change. And this time, not just in prayer or performance, but in pipes. Because now, the whispers are turning into speeches. The rumors into meetings. And astonishingly, officials into listeners. You hear talk of infrastructure, of sewage systems, of clean water on purpose, not just by accident. Radical, right? You walk to the river one morning and catch sight of something. Strange. Men in hats and boots, not digging graves, but trenches, deep, wide ones. Not for bodies, but for iron pipes the size of tree trunks. The engineers call it a proper drainage grid. You call it hope, or at the very least, a better class of trench. For years, the city's filth just lingered. In cellars, in alleys, under floorboards. Every house was its own little biological time bomb. But now, thanks to the work of a few stubborn reformers, Snow, yes, but others too, there's momentum. Historians still argue whether the big push came from public health idealism or sheer political embarrassment. After all, Parliament was famously humiliated during the Great Stink, when the smell from the Thames got so bad they nearly had to evacuate. That's right. Lawmakers finally acted not because of the dying masses, but because their own meetings smelled like soup left out in the sun. And it worked. Sort of. The government brought in men like Joseph Bazalgette, who designed an ambitious sewage system beneath London. Brick-lined tunnels, ventilation shafts, pumping stations that actually moved waste away from the drinking water instead of, directly into it. It wasn't immediate. Nothing in this era is. But slowly, pipe by pipe, valve by valve, the city began to fight back. You stand on your stoop and breathe. Still not fresh air, but better, less offensive. Your lungs don't itch like they used to, and your cousin no longer refuses to open windows, which feels like a small miracle. Even in the drawing rooms, change is afoot. Tea conversations now include the phrase public sanitation. Someone you know attends a talk on cholera transmission mechanisms. Your aunt buys a book titled Modern Cleanliness for the Modern Lady, which you suspect she never opens, but still, progress. And most importantly, people start drinking less pump water. Here's your fringe tidbit. Some skeptical households, unconvinced even by Snow's map, took to flavoring their water with gin or lemon just to kill the spirits. They weren't wrong about the gin. Alcohol can kill bacteria. But you can imagine how quickly those tea parties escalated. You attend one such gathering and find yourself surrounded by talk of drainage channels, personal filtration jugs, and a new device someone calls the domestic flush closet. Yes, that's right. The fancy toilets are back, but this time with plumbing that doesn't actively try to murder you. Of course, there are holdouts. There always are. Some believe this is all temporary, that once cholera fades, people will go back to burying waste in their gardens and sipping well water with the confidence of the eternally deluded. But they're losing ground. Even they can feel it, the slow pivot from superstition to science, from fear to fact. You, personally, feel conflicted. Grateful, yes, but also haunted. Because now that the danger is receding, you're forced to count what was lost. You make a list in your head each night. Names, faces, voices no longer heard. A ledger of grief. But you also begin to notice what remains. Children playing outside. Again. Traders returning to the square. A man tuning his fiddle beneath a gas lamp. The baker who once refused to touch money now smiles as he counts coins. And the sick cart? It hasn't passed in days. You almost miss it. Almost. There's even talk of festivals resuming, cautiously. Street fairs, public lectures. One man proposes a clean water day, complete with banners and speeches. Someone else suggests a ceremonial burial for the Broad Street pump handle. You hope it's buried deep, but even now, with pipes being laid and faith slowly shifting from saints to sanitation engineers, you remain wary. Because cholera may be retreating, but it hasn't vanished. Not entirely. It's just sleeping, waiting. For one leak, one bad connection, one act of negligence. You stand at your window and look out over the street, cleaner now, quieter. You see neighbors nodding to each other again, doors opening, cautiously. Someone is washing their stoop, and you wonder, what if we actually learn from this? What if we stop treating disease like a punishment and start treating it like a problem to be solved? That night, you dream of pipes stretching beneath cities, vast, humming arteries carrying danger away instead of delivering it. You dream of water that heals, of drains that drain, of children who grow up without tasting fear in every sip. You wake, and for once the air smells of soap and earth, and not of endings, but of beginnings. You open your eyes to light. Actual light. Not that dusty gray smear that usually filters in through soot-blackened glass, but real, pale morning light. There's a breeze, and for the first time in months, it doesn't carry the scent of death, or the suggestion of something rotting just out of sight. You sit up slowly, carefully, like you're testing whether the world outside your window is still real, and it is. Or at least, it's changed. The city is quiet in a new way. Not the haunted stillness of lockdowns and chalk-marked doors, but a kind of watchful peace. Streets are swept. Windows are open. There are fewer black ribbons fluttering from doorknobs. You haven't heard a morning bell in a week. You step out onto the stoop, dressed in something that isn't black. For the first time, it feels possible. Across the road, the greengrocer's boy whistles while unloading crates. Someone's painted a new sign for the cobbler. There's talk of rebuilding, of strengthening the new sewage system, of filtering the water, of using science to protect people rather than just hoping the heavens don't smite them again. You walk past the site of the old Broad Street pump, now just a patched-up slab of pavement. No marker, no ceremony, just absence. But you remember it. Everyone does. You pass the schoolhouse where children are actually playing, squealing with the kind of shameless joy only children can manage in a city that nearly buried itself. You see a girl skip past a water cart, a ribbon in her hair and no mask on her face. Her mother watches her with nervous eyes, but lets her skip anyway. You smile, you keep walking, past homes that now smell faintly of lemon oil and baked bread instead of vinegar and fear. Past shops that stock peppermint instead of potions, flour instead of funeral lace. You notice more flowers than you remember. People are planting again. One woman nods at you from her window. Her face is worn, but alive. You nod back. Still, there are ghosts, not the kind that rattle chains in the attic. The quieter kind, empty chairs at dinner, cups left clean in cabinets, names whispered in prayers, or not spoken at all. The ghosts are still here, walking beside you, but not to scare you, just to remind you what you survived. Historians still argue whether this was a turning point or just a moment of pause between tragedies. Because cholera doesn't disappear, it reemerges, in ports, in villages, in cities that get too confident and too thirsty. But here now, in this moment, there's a kind of fragile triumph. The maps changed, the minds changed. The pipes got deeper, the laws got stricter, and even the most stubborn began to boil their tea water without complaint. Your cousin, the one who survived along with you, talks about moving to the country. Too many memories here, she says. But you're not so sure. This place, as terrible as it's been, taught you something. That survival isn't just about luck. It's about knowing where your water comes from, who carries your chamber pot, who's willing to ask the questions no one else will, and who stays. Back at home, you pour a glass from the new kitchen tap. It gurgles gently, clean, clear, cold. You sip it slowly, ceremonially, as if you're honoring every name that didn't make it to this morning. It tastes like progress. Slightly metallic, maybe, but no death in it. You open the window. Fresh air. No one ever thought that would be possible again. The world feels quieter now, not empty, not dead, but listening. And just before bed, you tuck the tiny charm back into its box. The one you wore through the worst of it. A little tin token that didn't save you. Not really, but reminded you to believe something might. You slip into bed, stretch beneath sheets that no longer smell of illness, and pull the blanket to your chin. The city has bruises, but it's breathing, again. So are you, and though you'll never forget the sound of the sick cart, the sting of lie, the panic of that first stomach cramp, you're still here. Still upright, still watching and watched. It's not a victory parade, but it's enough. The lights are low now. The shadows stretch long across the floor. Outside your window, the city hums a little more softly, like it knows you need rest. You close your eyes and breathe deep. No acrid stench, no coal smoke, just quiet. Maybe you still hear it faintly in the back of your mind. The rattle of the sick cart, the clang of the church bell, the whisper of water that once carried death. But it fades with every breath. The world outside is different now, wiser perhaps, and you're part of that. You've walked through cholera's world tonight, its puddled streets, its perfumed parlors, its broken pipes and desperate prayers. You've knelt beside the Broad Street pump and watched strangers become suspects. But now, none of it can touch you. Not here, not now. Tonight, you lie safe in the clean hush of the present. wrapped in a comfort that those before you never knew. You're not fighting invisible things in the night. You're not waiting for the doctor who won't come. You're just resting. And you made it through. So let your shoulders sink. Let your breath slow. Let your body, clever and kind, do what it knows best. No more noise. No more dread. Just the soft, steady rhythm of sleep calling you gently from the edge of history. You're warm, you're safe, you're home. Sweet dreams.